Well, good morning to you. I'm Terry Hovey, pastor of First Baptist Church, and today I want to bring to you number 4 of our Twisted Scriptures series. So here we are on the 4th message of this series, right? And this is where we're taking some of the most commonly misappropriated, misapplied scriptures that we find in the Bible today, and then we take an organized look and thoughtful look at them to see if they have in fact been misappropriated or been twisted somewhat. And if they have, then what do they actually mean? And before I go any further, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever said, or have you ever thought something along the lines of, if I had a little bit more money, everything would be better. Somehow life would be better. Now, be honest now. Have you ever thought along the lines of, if I only had a little more money, maybe, if I only had maybe an extra $100, an extra $200, or an extra $300,000 a month, life would be a lot better for us. Things would just be better. Now, the reason I ask is because one of the most commonly misquoted scriptures that we're going to look at today is a scripture that is dealing with money. And the quote you usually hear surrounding this it goes like this: money is the root of all evil. Money is the root of all evil. Now, if you didn't know, this is incredibly misquoted, but you hear it like this all the time, all over the place, everywhere you go. Money is the root of all evil. Matter of fact, I want to show you a picture that I found. It was taken in a restaurant. It's actually a picture of a tip jar, and it says, and the tip jar has a sign on the front of it, the handwritten sign says, "Money is the root of all evil, cleanse yourself here." And you can take a look at it up there now, but you people aren't watching on video, obviously you can't. But I've got to admit, this is actually pretty clever. It's a clever idea. And I'd be willing to bet that whoever did this probably did not know that this was a misquote. But because they see it like this everywhere. Anywhere you go. Money is the root of all evil. So let's take a look at what the Bible actually says. And in his letter to Timothy, the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 6, verse 10, "For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil." For the what? Love? Yeah, for the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And some people might look at this all by itself and they say, well, that's not me. That's not me. That's for the rich. That's for the wealthy. That's not me. I don't love money. I need money, right? What does that even mean? How can you tell if someone loves money? Well, you know what? The Bible actually gives us a definition of what it means to love money. Solomon, probably the wealthiest man in the world at his time, gave us a definition when he said in Ecclesiastes 5:10, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity." Now, that was a New American Standard translation. Listen how another translation puts it. Ecclesiastes 5:10, "If you love money and wealth, you will never be satisfied with what you have." This doesn't make sense either. Now, that was the CEV, the Contemporary English Version. And I love the way it puts it. If you love money and wealth, you will never be satisfied with what you have. Never satisfied with what you have. Wow. Earlier I asked you a question. Have you ever said or thought that if you only had a little bit more money, life would be easier, or it'd be better somehow? And now, when I look at this biblical definition of what it means to be loving money, all of a sudden, I'm kind of uncomfortable with my own spiritual position here. If you love money and wealth, you'll never be satisfied with what you have. A little more money and will make my life easier. A little more money would make me happier. If you love money and wealth, you will never be satisfied with what you have. Folks, I have to admit that there have been more than just a few times when I have thought and even stated outright, if I only had a little more money. Especially when Terry and I were first married. You know, for many years afterwards, when we were struggling to pay all the bills that we had, it seemed like every time we turned around, Terry was pregnant again. Yeah, if you don't know, my wife is also named Terry. So I'm Terry Lee, and she's Terry Zanette. But every time I turned around, she was pregnant again, seems like. And we had college loans to pay for. We had medical bills to pay. We had rent. We had food. We had gas. We had the whole kit and caboodle, everything, right? And times were tough. And many times we felt like we were drowning in debt. But then, you know what? We survived. Somehow we survived. And as time progressed, we advanced in our careers and our income grew. And even as our family grew. But the financial growth didn't seem to keep up. You know, it never seemed to be enough. The more we had, the more we spent. And the less we ended up with, because we always felt like we were just barely making it. You know, we felt like our heads were just barely above the water. And that every now and then a big old wave would come and slap us in the face and we'd inhale some of that water. You know, do you know what I mean? Has anybody ever been like that in their life? Well, you know, but if I only had a little more money, everything would be better. If you love money and wealth, you will never be satisfied with what you have. It's sobering thought, isn't it? We need money to survive in this world, so we all get jobs, we create businesses in order to get money. But the Bible tells us the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. So what is Paul talking about here? Should we all quit our jobs and just go out and pitch tents in the wilderness somewhere or under a bridge someplace? You know, is it money bad, poverty good? You know, do we do let's do what we've been doing the last few weeks to make a determination about this. Let's take a look at the context and see if we can get a better understanding of what's going on here. Who wrote it, why he wrote it, what's the big picture here, what's the theme, and then we'll look to see what the rest of the Bible says about this topic, about money, and then we'll see how we can apply all of this that we find out to our own lives. So the letter to Timothy was written by the Apostle Paul, and it was one of three of the pastoral letters. There were only 3 pastoral letters. 2 letters were written to Timothy and 1 to Titus. Now, Paul wanted to encourage these young pastors in their faith, give them instruction in their ministries, and also advise them about some general functions within the church. Both of these pastors were considered Paul's sons in the faith. In other words, they came to believe in Jesus through the ministry of the Apostle Paul. And then he personally discipled them. And it's very apparent he loved these young men as sons because the words that we read from him to them seem to be very personal and filled with heartfelt affection. Now, at the beginning of chapter 6, in verse 3, Paul begins to warn Timothy about other ministers, so-called ministers who are going to be coming in, preaching different doctrines than what Timothy has heard from Paul, what he's learned from Paul. And he tells Timothy that these false teachers then won't agree with sound words or conform to the doctrine of godliness, but instead they're going to cause disputes and disruption and division amongst them in their efforts to enrich themselves at the expense of the church. And then the last part of verse 5, Paul revealed their motives, these false teachers' motives, when he wrote that they suppose that godliness is a means of gain. So the main reason why these false teachers are coming into the church and causing disruption is because they hope to get something out of it. Now that may mean they're wanting notoriety, or maybe they're wanting prestige or something like that, but more than likely it was financial gain. If you love money and wealth, you will never be satisfied with what you have. Now, continuing with the context, in verse 6, Paul tells us godliness actually is a means of great gain. So godliness is a big theme in this chapter. It's used 3 more times in the remaining verses, along with several other words that carry similar meanings, such as righteousness and faith and love and gentleness and good confession. So Paul said that godliness is actually a means of great gains when accompanied by contentment. That's also in verse 6. Godliness is a means of great gains when, when accompanied by contentment. Contentment. When accompanied by contentment. And then, to emphasize this point, he goes on to talk about being content with what we have. Food and clothing, and because we brought nothing into this world, and we can surely take nothing that we've gotten in this world out of this world with us, right? And so you see, until now, he has been encouraging Timothy to stand firm against false teachers who are going to be coming in and disrupting everything and causing problems. And he's encouraging him to not be like them, but to be content with what he has. Because the richest people, folks, the richest people are not those who have the most, but it's those who need the least. Let me say that again. The richest people are not those who have the most, but those who need the least. You know, Terry and I may have felt like we were struggling, that we had so little when we were younger, you know, in our marriage and building our family. But if we took a look at the way people live in other parts of the world, which Terry actually did when she went on a couple of medical missionary journeys or trips down into Central America. But if we had taken a look at these lives, we might have looked at our own lives much differently. Because we had food, you know, and we had cars. We had a couple of horses. We had some calves. We had a house with hot and cold running water. We had indoor plumbing for restrooms and showers and stuff. And we had good jobs, and we were making a pretty good living, even though we were still struggling. But in other parts of the world, people live in lean-tos. You know, little shanties. They don't have running water. They don't have electricity. They got dirt floors, no toilets, no door on their lean-to keep the wildlife out. You know, and they've got nothing that we take for granted. And yet, they have peace. They've got peace of mind. They've got joy. You know, they've got a level of contentment that we have in the Western world, in America. We have difficulty achieving this level of contentment. Because the richest people in the world aren't those who have the most, but those who need the least. And then when we go on to verse 9 now, it's like Paul switches gears. He's been talking about being content with what you have, but now he's going to start talking about those who have and want more. Because he says in verse 9, but those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Those who want to get rich. You know, sounds kind of like everybody in America, right? Or vast majority of people in America. You know, can you say Powerball? Those who want to get rich, what happens to them? It says that they fall into temptation or a snare or a trap. And that word there that's used for a snare, it carries the idea of the traps that people use to catch small prey. You know, like that rope that's tied to a bent sapling, or maybe that box that's propped up on a stick with bait underneath it. You know, it's a trap. And so, in their never-ending pursuit of riches, those harmful and selfish desires that they fall into will plunge them into ruin and destruction. Verse 10, because the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some folks who were longing for it or chasing after it have wandered away or have been seduced from the faith and pierced themselves through with many griefs, or they've been filled their lives with regret and with sorrow. Do you know anyone like that? You know, money so filled money so filled their lives that they lost everything. You know, maybe their marriages broke up and they've lost their wives, their kids, their home, everything. All because they lost focus on what is really important in life and in their pursuit of worldly mammon. And you know, when we think of people like this, it can sound like money is a bad thing, right? But is it? Is money evil? Well, no. No, it's not. Money is inanimate. It has no soul. It cannot think, or it cannot form any thoughts. So it can't be evil. Having money is not bad. But loving money can be much more dangerous than you might think. Because think about it. You know, Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, you cannot serve God and wealth. Now, it's interesting that he said wealth, not power. That you can't serve God and wealth, not sex, or not any other thing, popularity. He says wealth. You can't serve God and wealth, or money. And I believe it's because for the vast majority of people, money will be the number one competitor for the heart. Number one. Why else would something like the prosperity gospel be so popular? Well, because it promises something that we all lust after, money, right? Well, I believe it's because money is the competitor for the human heart. It becomes an idol to us. And when we love money and spend all of our time pursuing it, then it is an idol, and it has replaced God, which is why Jesus told us, you cannot serve God in mammon or wealth. So since we can't serve God in wealth, and the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, what does this say, or what does this mean for those who are wealthy, or those who are rich, or becoming rich? Are they doing something wrong? Are they evil people by being rich? No, not necessarily. Remember what I said, having money is not bad. And just because someone has more of it than I do or more of it than you do, maybe more than most people do, doesn't mean that they pursued it or got it in an ungodly way. I want you to look at what I found in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18. God is speaking Moses is speaking to the people. He says, but you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth. It is he that is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is to this day. God gives us the ability to make wealth. Now, isn't that amazing? Yeah. He gives us this ability not only so he can bless us, but also so that we might be a blessing for other people. You know, you can help a lot of people when you've got the money to do it, right? You can feed the poor, you can help the sick, you can provide what the funds that are necessary for missionaries that are going out into the field. There are countless things that you can do when you've got plenty of money. You know, plenty of money coming in too, so that you keep doing those good things. You don't want to apologize, folks, for the blessings of God. Instead, what you should do is maximize those blessings. Verse 17 of our chapter again, 1 Timothy 6:17, Paul tells Timothy to instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Don't be conceited because you're rich. And don't put your hope in riches. Put your hope in God, who gave you those riches. So how do we put our hope in riches? Well, you remember my opening question, right? If you had a little more money, then everything would be okay. Now, thinking that just a little more and everything is going to be all right is putting your hope in riches. It's the very definition of it. And why do we do this? Well, I believe it's because money promises things that only God can provide. You know, money promises things like happiness. If you have money, you'll find happiness. But true happiness comes from God. Money promises security. I'll be able to pay off my mortgage, pay off my car. You know, I won't be in debt anymore. But true security comes from a knowledge that God loves us and he gave his son for us. And that my security rests in the knowledge that he will never leave me nor forsake me. Money promises significance also. With a little more money, I can wear a fancy suit. With a little more money, you know, I can drive a nicer car with that, instead of this old junk jalopy that I'm driving around backfiring all over the place, and it embarrasses me all to no end every time I pull into a parking lot somewhere, church or wherever, you know, because it's backfiring. But true significance comes through the knowledge that we are children of the Most High God and joint heirs with Christ. When we think that we need more money to be happy, or to have security or to have significance in this world, then we are deceived and we have fallen under the influence of a false god, an idol. Because money can never meet your deepest need. Only Jesus Christ can do that. Money won't keep your children off of drugs. Matter of fact, money may provide the open door for them to get involved in that addiction. More money won't make your spouse love you more. And folks, if it does, then that ain't love. Money is not the root of all evil, but the love of money is. And it's a heart thing. It's not wrong to have. It's not wrong to be blessed, but it is wrong to love it. It is wrong to pursue it to the exclusion of your relationship with God or your relationship with anyone else for that matter. If God has blessed you in this area, then don't make excuses or apologize for God's blessings, but maximize those blessings. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look what Paul says in verses 18 and 19. He says, instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life itself. It sounds an awful lot like maximizing the blessings of God, doesn't it? To me, this sounds like that great gain you get from godliness and contentment that Paul was talking about in verse 6. Be rich in good works. Be generous and ready to share. Store up treasure. It also sounds like something else that Jesus said elsewhere in Matthew 6, 19 through 21. Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now some may say, well, Terry, I'm not rich. I'd like to be generous, but I'd like to be ready to share what I've got, but I'm not rich. I barely have enough to make ends meet. How can I be rich in good works like this when I just don't have much to spare? Plus, you know what? I don't even know someone who has a need. And if I did, what I could give them was so little that it would be more of a slap in the face than it would any kind of assistance. Well, let me tell you what Terry and I found out, and we learned a long time ago, back when we were struggling to make ends meet. We discovered a powerful a tool for spiritual growth, and it's a cure for the love of money, and it is also a way for us to be generous and help others at all at the same time, all rolled into one thing. Are you ready for it? You want to know what we discovered? We discovered tithing. Yeah, tithing. 10% of my gross, not net, gross, because God wants the first fruits. 10% right off the top, given back to God. Returning a portion of what is already His, that He has blessed us with, and giving it back to Him to use as He sees fit. It's an Old Testament principle that Jesus endorses in the New Testament. Matthew 23:23, He's talking to the scribes. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. Without neglecting the others. What he's talking about there is the tithing. He wasn't condemning them for tithing. He was condemning them for tithing and not doing these other things. By tithing, folks, I am able to support the church that I love, the church that I belong to. Because, folks, every church, it's got bills that it's got to pay, or it's going to close the doors. They have to meet the bills. By tithing, I'm also able to support missions because the church takes a portion of what it receives in and uses it to support other missions and ministries that we as Southern Baptists support as a denomination. So it's taking my little bit that I'm giving as my tithe, it's taking a portion of that so that now I am also supporting missions. And the special offerings that we take up, Annie Armstrong, Lottie Moon, and others, it all gets pooled together at the Southern Baptist of Texas, and all these offerings from churches all over the country, and in order to financially support home and foreign missions. By tithing, a portion of the money that I give is used by my church for the people of my own community. And we know of a need. When we have helped others with electric bills, with putting food on the table, with putting heat in their houses, or even gas in the tank. And all of these things are affected by the tithe. The more you give, the better able you can be a part of giving to other ministries and helping people in our community. And let me tell you something else that Terry and I learned. Let me tell you something else we learned. We learned that after we started faithfully tithing, somehow, I'm not going to say it like magic because magic is evil, but because it's a God thing instead. But somehow this God thing happened, and we were always able to have enough to meet our needs. We thought at first that we just couldn't afford it. But now we know that from time to time we even have excess. And now we also know, or we deeply feel, that we cannot afford not to tithe. The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Evil such as selfishness and greed. Folks, how do Christians express selfishness and greed? Well, one way is by not tithing. How do we know that we love money? We never have enough. We're never satisfied with what we've got. How do we cure that? With generosity. Generosity. And if you want to be generous in a big and a very effective way, tithe. Tithe. And what's the promise that's given to those who do good and who are generous and willing to share? He says in verse 19, you will take hold of that which is life indeed. You will take hold of that which is life indeed. And isn't that what we're all about? Walking this Christian walk, living this Christian life, keeping our eyes focused on the goal, and having our hearts and our minds in heaven, because we are not of this world, we are of that world. And that is where our focus is. Amen.